everyone, it's Olivia with another painting here. I've just had my mind on the beach, so I figured that could be the topic for our painting today. It's definitely been hot enough, so we're all just gonna pretend we're on the beach for this class. We're starting with this guy over here. As we always do, we're gonna go background, middle ground, foreground. And so important things for us to have: somewhere to put your paint. It can be a paper plate, something wrapped in foil or wax paper, whatever you have. Some paper towels or something to wipe with. Brushes. Water. I have a blow dryer over here in case we need to blow dry in between. I always say I don't think that we'll have to, but we always end up having to. So again, I don't think we'll have to on this one, but we'll see. Just keep it handy. I have my blank canvas and my set of paints here. I have my red, my blue, my yellow, my black, and my white. And that is all you'll ever need here. In this painting, I have kind of like a tan, a brown, I have a green. We're going to mix those just from our primaries, but if you do have a green, when we go to mix our green, then just use your green. You can always doctor it up a little bit. Like if your green is very foresty, like a dark green, and you want this kind of light grassy green, you can always put a little yellow into it, a little white into it. It doesn't have to be exactly the one that you have. We can kind of do what we want here. Okay. So I'm going to start with a big brush. This one's probably 1.5 inches. If you have like a real big brush like this, you certainly can use this one if you want. Anything in this bigger area, if you start to get down like less than 1 inch or so, that might take you a little bit longer than we're wanting this to take here. So try to stay somewhere in the 1 to 2 inch range or bigger. So I'm going to grab my blue and I'm going to grab my white. And so we're going to be just doing the sky part. We're not going to worry about the clouds for right now. If I can get this open. Okay, I'm going to give myself a good amount of white, a good amount of blue. Oh, it's so hard to open today. Okay, white and blue, very plain, very simple. And so all we're going to do is we're going to take our brush dipped into both paints. You're going to get a lot on your brush. And we're going to start to mix this up back and forth in our sky here. And I would say we're going to go 1/4 of the way down. So if you want to give yourself a little guideline there, we'll come down a little lower. And so as you brush this on, your brush is going to be mixing that blue and that white together. And now if we have some areas that are lighter blue, some that are darker blue, that's totally okay because that is what the sky looks like in real life. It's never going to be one totally smooth shade of blue. So variety's okay. We're going to cover this whole thing. Make sure you get your left side, your right side. If you feel so inclined to do your top edge. I want my blue a little darker, so I'll add a little bit more blue, a little bit less white. We're just covering the whole top 1/4 of the canvas. And now don't worry too much about what this bottom line looks like here. If you kind of have a little, if your ability to make that straight line isn't perfect, that's fine, because we're not even going to see that. We're going to paint right over it. We're just going to get our background in here. Okay, maybe I'll even come a little lower just to make sure that we have room for that, all that ocean that we want, and so that there's not a gap in there. And again, what this bottom line looks like here does not matter at this point. So go down a little bit farther than you see your sky going. We want a little bit of like a buffer zone down here. Okay. All right, so sky done. We're going to pause on the sky. We're going to let this dry a little bit while we do our water, and then we're going to come back up to it to do the clouds. And so if you have another of the same brush, I have two of these brushes and I use them the most out of any of my brushes, absolutely. So if you have two big brushes, or if you don't have two big brushes and you want to get two, highly recommend. But if you don't have to, it's no big deal. You can take your water, clean the sky off, dry it really, really well before we move on. If you don't have, or if you do have to, grab your other guy. And we're going to start in on our water. And so we're going to be using the same colors, our blue and our white, but in order to get, so if you look at the color of the water down here and the color of your sky up here, they're about the same tone, but they're a totally different color. The water has a little bit of like a, more of a teal, you know, that like ocean blue. And we're going to achieve that by adding a little bit of yellow in. And I mean just a little bit. But so it's going to go in its own spot here. We're not mixing anything on the palette. We're going to mix it right in the water like we did with the sky. Okay, so we're going to be doing largely the same thing that we did with the sky. We're just going to do it with the water. And so when we come down to the water, we're going to take our dark, dark blue. We're going to come straight across here. As we come down, we're going to start to work in the white as we go down, down, down. And as we get into that lighter blue too, we're also going to pick up a little bit of that yellow, and that's going to give us that kind of ocean sea foamy green blue color. Okay, so let's start with just our blue. Our dark, dark blue, so I have no white on here yet, it's just our dark blue. I'm going to come across. This is the time where we're going to work on that straight line here, the horizon line. As you can see, my line in this one is not very straight. So that's okay if you don't get it the first time, it's no big deal. It's hard to do a straight line going sideways here, but we're going to try our best, because that's all we can do, right? Now, if you're going to use a ruler or something, people always ask me that, can I just use a ruler? You could, but I always say try it without one first. See where you can get without it. Anyone who's been in my classes before knows that when you do something like this one, the straight line, I mean, you know, it's important, but it's not going to make or break your painting. If it's not pin straight, it's not going to ruin your whole painting. So get that just as good as you can. And so we're going to be coming down with our dark blue, maybe 2, I'll say 3 or so inches. Bring your dark blue down a few inches here. And we're going to be laying this one on pretty thick, because I think it's just the nature of this blue paint, but this dark, dark blue tends to be a little bit transparent. So give yourself a nice thick layer of that. As we get down, it can thin out a little bit. Okay, so we should be about here. You have a solid 3 inches or so of your dark blue. Now we're going to start to add in our white. And when we add in our white, we're going to add a little bit of our yellow too. And so I'm not going to rinse my brush off. I just kind of tried to wipe off most of the paint that was on here so I don't have any big areas of blue. So I'm going to dip into my white, and I'm going to grab a touch of my yellow, just a little bit. Always start with a tiny bit, and then you can always add more, because what you don't want is green water. You want a hint of that yellow just so it makes that kind of sea foamy, I know it's called seafoam green, but it's more of a blue. So try not to go overboard with this yellow at first. Grab a little bit more white. And we're going to work this up into our blue. And since this blue is wet, it should be mixing with our white. And just keep going back and forth. Back and forth, back and forth. And you see that yellow that I had at the beginning is kind of transforming into this nice light tealy blue. Just back and forth over and over. It's going to seem really ridiculous and repetitive, but the more you do it, the smoother it'll get, the less of a harsh transition you will see. You don't want to have a line in your water where it goes from dark blue to light blue to white. You want them all to kind of blend together as well as you can, right? Okay, and as we go lower, we're adding even more white. We're trying to fade into this kind of shore down here. And if you look at my first copy over there, I'm well below where my sand starts. I'm painting all the way down to here, and my sand starts way up here. And so we're gonna make kind of a crooked little seashore there. So we wanna bring this part of the water down farther than maybe we think we actually need it. Okay, and of course it's really hard to see on mine. So let's see. You're looking for something like that, where it fades down into, I promise it's light blue down here. And if I wanted it to be even a little bit of a stronger blue, I could add some of my blue back in here. So like if I wanted this to be a little darker, I could take some blue, add it back in here, and pull that darker blue down a little bit. And this is the same thing that I'm going to say that I said with the sky. This doesn't have to be solid blue, one color down to the next color. If there's little areas where your light blue comes up into your dark blue and areas where your dark blue kind of sets down into your light blue, that's fine, because the ocean has waves, darker areas, lighter areas. You never know what's right under that water, right? So it kind of freaks me out. So you never know. It can be light and dark areas. And so I'm thinking that's good for me. And so I would say my blue water area comes down to about 2/3 of our canvas is covered at this point. Okay, that's all we need from that guy. And so right now, we're gonna grab, now we can either grab brush number 3 if you have a slightly smaller one, like a maybe 1 inch, 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch, something like that. If you don't and you want to use the same big brush that we've been using, you can absolutely do that. Let me take this guy out. So you can use this big one that we've been using. You're just going to have to use it a little differently, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Dry it off really good. Dry it off facing down so all the water runs out of this metal part. Okay, so I'm going to use my smaller one, but I will demonstrate with both here. While our water is drying up a little bit, we're going to come back up into the sky and we're going to throw little clouds in there. So you're going to take from your white here. You're going to get just a little bit on your, I don't know why this brush does that. The bristles always separate. But you're going to get just a little bit of white on your brush here. You don't want too much because what you don't want is, I guess unless it's like a super cloudy day, you don't want your clouds to be super, super thick and white because it's going to look a little unrealistic. If you look over here, you can kind of see through some of my clouds. They kind of fade out. It's not just like a big sticker that's on there. So I would say err on the side of going lighter, and then as you layer them up, you're going to get some areas like here, here, here that are much thicker and brighter white, and that's okay, but I would say only some areas are going to be like that. Some areas are going to be kind of just this light, very light, like wispy cloud business that we have going on here. So we'll tread lightly. And of course, like I said, with the sky and with the water, there's no rhyme or reason how we do these clouds. There's no certain way. You don't need to put them in a particular spot or not. If you don't want any clouds, you can leave it just like this. It can be a perfectly clear day if you want. But if you're looking to do some clouds, there's 2 ways to do them. And so if you want to start with way 1, we're going to pick a spot for our cloud. And the way number 1 is that we're going to take our brush and we're going to swirl it. Right, so you're going to go in just little mini circles here. And if you look at my brush, it's starting to run out of paint, but that's good. That's what we want. Like I said, we don't want a big harsh looking cloud. We want little soft clouds. And so you're going to take your brush, just go in little circular motions here. I'm going to start to see a cloud come through there, right? So you can go in little circles, or if you have your big brush like this that you're using from before, the circles might not work as well for you because then all of your clouds are going to be very big like this. And so another way that we can do some clouds is that you can take your brush and use kind of the corner. So I dipped just the corner in my paint like this, and we can go just up and down, tapping to make our clouds. So again, I'm just touching on the corner of the brush, and we can do them this way too. So you'll get the same idea where your brush will kind of start to run out of paint. It'll thin out, up, down, over and over and over, and you'll get kind of the same thing. And so what starts to happen is my brush ran out of paint, so I'll pick up a little bit more. And let's say I want this middle part of the cloud to be like the thickest, right? And so when I go back in, that part of the cloud is the part that darkens up. And so then we leave the edges a little bit lighter, right? Same thing, I'll come back to this big cloud. Maybe I want this side over here to be the kind of the big fluffy side. All right, and so in order to make these look as realistic as you can, I would say try not to make every cloud, you know, fluffy cotton ball shape. Some of your clouds can just look like this. They're going to be just kind of straight little areas where your white's going to come in kind of strips. But again, you're going to be doing the same motion here, just that kind of patting. Up and down, up and down. Try to give yourself a little variety with the clouds, have some hanging off the edge like this. Some little guys, some big ones. Change it up a little bit. I would say the most important thing with these clouds, in order to make them look as realistic as you can, and of course all clouds are different, so who knows, right? But what I've found is that the clouds look more realistic if you taper the edges. So if you look at this guy that I did, the edges kind of pinch off, as opposed to if you think of like how you would instinctively draw a cloud with like a pencil maybe. You probably do a couple bubbles on the top and then the edges would be curved, right? So instead of doing that bubbly cloud with the curved edges, try to do, you can do some of the bubbly cloud lumps on top, but when you get to the end, try to taper it off into kind of almost a point, I guess, instead of making those edges circular. Another thing that you can do that I find makes them look more realistic is put them in clumps. And so it doesn't need to be one standalone cloud that is this shape, and you don't need to just do a bunch of these little bubbly clouds. If you put them in kind of a group that has no particular shape, maybe it doesn't conform to that regular kind of cloud shape that we think of when we think of clouds. If you get some kind of just irregular pattern going here, because you see those type of clouds, right? I mean, clouds can literally look like anything. So we're not going to be too self-conscious here about what we make and what it looks like, because no matter what you make, I promise that you've probably seen a cloud that looks like that in your life. There is little that you can do here that will be unrealistic. All right, and again, if you want some of those areas to be nice and thick looking, go back in with more of your white paint. So the darker the white is, the fuller your clouds will look. So maybe in the middle, they're a little bit fuller towards the edge. They kind of taper out a little. Okay. Now let's see. When we're looking at composition, it kind of helps to take a step back to look at what we have here. I think I like what I have here. Maybe I'll have a little one coming off the edge here. All right, and look at that, we have clouds. And so if this is your first time doing one of these classes, the benefit, I guess, to having these pre-recorded classes is that you can pause the video whenever you need to. So if you are just really not feeling these clouds, if it's a little tricky, if it's the first time you've ever tried to do something like this and you need a little bit more time, feel free to pause the video, take whatever time you need doing each section, and then you can just start right back up, okay? Pros and cons of online classes, right? All right, and so make sure you don't leave any of your brushes just sitting out. You don't want them to get crusty, right? Because once that paint dries on the brush, it is impossible to get out. Okay. So I'm going to take the smaller brush that we were using, it's my maybe like 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch brush, just to mix this color. This next color we're going to mix up the sand color If you want to, I mean, it's a pretty big area, so if you want to apply it with one of your bigger brushes and just mix with the smaller one, if you want to mix and apply with the same brush, which I always find is easier, you can do that. And we're gonna need, I guess not that much of this. I was gonna say, if you have a palette like I have, I might mix mine in this center area instead of one of these little pots so that I know I have enough. So maybe do a little bit more of this than maybe we think we need. And so this is, I guess, a lesson in don't think that the teacher never makes mistakes, because when I was doing this original painting, I mixed up a pot of what I thought was going to be sand color, and I just worked on that for longer than I want to admit, and it was just came out as the most horrible green brown, like it was, didn't look like sand, it was terrible. And so lesson is that it's really hard to go in and just make tan from your blue, your yellow, your red, and your white, because that's the colors we're going to use. So what I'm going to suggest is that it's much easier to make brown. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with almost like a chocolate brown, like a very dark brown. We're going to use just our red, our yellow, and our blue, and then we're going to add in the white that's going to lighten it to this kind of sandy tan color. If you try to start with the tan color by adding in your white, I mean, if you can do it, more power to you, but I tried and it came out horrible. So we're going to start with just our brown. And so again, if you have a tan or if you have a brown, then by all means use that. If you don't, then we'll follow along here. And so I already have some blue and some yellow, so I'm going to just add a little bit of red so that we can start with our brown. And so making a brown, people always think it's really easy, but it's actually kind of tricky. You do just kind of mix all the colors together, but your ratios have to be right. It's almost always going to come out leaning in one direction. It's going to be too red or too blue, too yellow looking. So just start with a little bit of each and build from there. So I did maybe 50% white, 25% red, 25% blue. That's about what I started with. It actually didn't come that bad. Okay, so you see what I'm working with here. So mine is kind of, it's almost like a terracotta-y color, like that kind of brown, rusty orange color. And so what you do with your brown when you need it to go more towards neutral, and so mine's kind of like orange leaning, I would say. And so you're going to add the opposite of that color. So I'm going to add a little bit of blue, maybe a little more red to like make it a little bit more purpley. But if your brown comes out just out of this world, like, you know, super red or super yellow, definitely just go online and Google color wheel. And you'll see the wheel, it'll have red, yellow, blue, but it'll have green, orange, wow, and purple. Yeah, I should know, right? And you'll see how the colors relate to each other. And so you'll be able to look at the wheel, and you'll look at your color that you mixed up, and if your brown looks very green to you, like a very just like muddy looking green, then you're going to go on the color wheel, you're going to find what's opposite of that color, and that's the color you're going to add to whatever you've mixed up to make it more neutral. And so opposites kind of cancel each other out. And so that's what we're looking for here. We're looking for as neutral of a brown as we can get. If your brown is a little bit orange leaning, then that's okay. For like a sand color, that's fine. Mine is very orange leaning, so I'm going to add definitely more blue. But if it's a little bit on the orange side, that's okay. Sand can be that way. But as close as we can get, we're looking for a neutral brown. I'm thinking that looks good to me. It probably looks exactly the same to you guys, but once we have a little bit of our brown, and keep in mind, if you only have a little bit of this, that's okay because we're going to be mixing a majority of it with white, quite a bit of white to make the sand color, because remember, we have like a very dark brown here. And so what I would say is leave maybe, I don't know, leave like a dime-sized amount of your brown that we've just mixed up. So we're gonna work with a lighter brown and a darker brown, or like a one with tan and one with like a neutral brown. And so we're gonna scoop a lot of our color, we're gonna leave a little bit of the dark, scoop a lot of it into another section, and we're gonna start to add our white, and this is where we're gonna get our sand color. Right. Much better than last time. Okay, might need a little bit more white. And so we're going to be using the dark brown that we left out for some highlights, or lowlights, I mean. And then we're going to be using the rest of this tan for kind of the base. Okay, so I've got my base sand color, I've got my dark tan here. And so what we're gonna do, we're gonna come a third of the way up maybe, and we're gonna start to just paint the whole thing with our lighter tan color. So if you mixed with this brush that you're gonna apply with, perfect, you'll have a bunch of paint on here. And we're just gonna cover this whole bottom part. Again, make sure we're getting our left and our right sides. We're going to come up to right around where our water starts. Okay, and now if you want your shoreline to be straight across like your water is, you can definitely do that. I gave mine a little bit of a curve, and I promise that one was intentional, just to give it a little bit of variety. Again, you can keep it straight across, whatever you're feeling, but what I did was I kind of came a little higher on this side, and this part doesn't need to be straight. Give this edge a little wobble here, because it's our shoreline. All right, so we've got our beach. Okay. And so here's the part where we're going to take our same brush, it's got our light kind of tan color, and I've also just dipped into that leftover kind of brown that we had left, and we're going to start to put some dark areas in. And so closer to your shoreline, I'm going to add some of this dark in, and it should mix with the with the tan that we have. Because we just put it on, it's going to be still wet. So it should be able to mix in there pretty smoothly. And we're working a little bit fast because we want this to stay dark, or to stay wet. So what I'm going to do down here is we're going to pick some areas to have these little dunes, right? And so the way that you do that is you put dark on one side of a dune and you put light on the other side of the dune. And it makes kind of this little point that you see over here and that you see here. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take dark on your brush, you're going to pick a spot, and you're going to swoop down. Right, so pick a spot, swoop down. Pick a spot, swoop down. Right, and that's going to be one side of my dune. So I'm going to do that again, I'm going to do that kind of in the middle here where my like middle track is. And I'll tell you what, when I was making this painting, when you first do the sand part, it does not look like much. But we'll get there. Maybe I'll make another one over here. We're just kind of doing swipes of this darker brown. Just to mix up the sand a little bit. And there's no like super harsh areas where I'm going to say you definitely need dark here, you definitely need light here. It's kind of just up to wherever you want. I would say, if anything, get some dark in the middle here so we can kind of make our little, we have our little like path going here. So try to get some in there. In the middle here, I'm going to make some little curves, some little smile shapes here to kind of make it look like a path. And if it gets too dark, go back in with your light. You can always kind of taper it out, right? If you have your dark in there and you're like, wow, that is just really too dark, you can always take some white on your brush too. Work some white in there. You want to emphasize your little dunes here. Take some of that white and come on the other side of the dune. The same way that you did on the first side, but you're going to go light on one side, dark on the other side, and that's going to really give you that little peak. Okay. Alright, and the last thing that we're going to do with this brush is we're going to take a little bit of our dark blue that we did the top of the water with, and this is going to seem odd. We're going to take the same brush, I'm not gonna rinse it off. I'm gonna dip tiny bit, like just a tiny bit in the corner. And if you look down in this first copy, you can see that I have little areas of blue in some of the dunes down here. And so you kind of use this darker blue as a shadow area. So I'll say this middle part where you have kind of these back and forth swishes where you want this part of the path to look walked on, I'll say, like packed sand, then you're going to use this blue as kind of a darkening agent. And we're just doing little bits. Of course, you don't want the sand to look blue per se. You want it more to look like a shadow, I guess. And again, this tan should still be a little bit wet, so it should work kind of into the colors that you already have. It shouldn't totally sit on top. Should blend a little bit. So if you want to throw a little blue in there to kind of deepen those dark sand values, go ahead and do that. If this makes you really uncomfortable, no need. I mean, if you have some darker areas up here, you could throw a little blue in here. I would say you could use a little bit of this blue anywhere where you have your kind of darker tan. Again, you don't need it, it's just a little detail. Okay, that was a lot, and like I said, it probably doesn't look like we have much going on down here at this point in time. That's totally okay. And I'll say another time, the benefit of these videos is that you can go back if I went too fast into that part. Feel free to rewind, watch what I did again. But basically, to summarize, to make our little dunes, you want to go down on one side with a dark color and down on the other side with a light color so that they peak in the middle, and that's going to make it look like a dune, right? So I did a couple of those on the sides. In the middle here, you want to kind of go in U shapes to make that little path, and then the rest of the stuff at the top here, I kind of just have random areas of lighter blue, or lighter tan, darker tan. I threw some white in there, some brown, just to give it some little variance, right? And so that brush goes in the water. We are going to pick up, let's see, a smaller brush. I'll say in the quarter inch range, something like this. Flat is, I'll say, better, but not necessary. Flat as in your brush can go like this. The edge on top, like this brush is round versus this one is flat, doesn't matter. So flat as in dimension, not flat as in shape on the top. Like if you have a brush like this, like a completely round brush, wouldn't use that one. Try to get something flat if you can. I have this one, maybe I'll use this guy. All right, and so we're gonna come up into our water here and make a little bit of our waves. We're gonna chop up this edge on the bottom there, because if you look at my water here, I have a little parts of it that are still a little bit tacky. It's not like wet. So if your water is super wet and you don't think that you can put this stuff on top, then either give it a blow dry, just a little one, or just, pause and wait for a minute or two. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our little flat brush that we just got, we're gonna take a little bit of our white, and what we're gonna do is you're gonna take your brush horizontally, whatever long way that means for you, so not this way, we're gonna go sideways, and we're gonna be doing one of those up and down, kind of just tapping things in here, and we're gonna start to build up our shoreline. Right, so I'm just going up and down, kind of in lines here. And this is one of those things that definitely does not need to be in a perfectly straight line. So we're just going up and down. We're kind of disguising that shore. You can get a good amount of paint on your brush for this, because it's going to be kind of like our clouds, where some areas are going to be lighter and some are going to be darker. So like maybe this area I want a lot of white here to make it look like a nice big thick foamy wave. But then maybe I take my white and I do another one out here a little bit into the water, and maybe I want this one to be a little thinner, so I don't need quite as much paint. And so if you have a brush that's a really distinct shape, like if you look at my brush, if I do a spot with it, it kind of makes that little oval. And if I do that over and over again, it makes the exact same shape. And so if yours is doing that and you don't really like the pattern that it's making, feel free to take your brush and give them a little, kind of just mess up that shape a little bit. Give it a little side swipe, I guess, just so that shape isn't so distinct if you don't like the way that that looks. So I guess it'll be a combination of kind of patting and kind of pulling out that shape for you, right? So I might tap a little bit of this white in here, but when I get to the edges, maybe I pull it out with just a little sideways brush here. And this is going to come onto your sand a little bit here, like the waves would. You know, there's always that little bit of like transparent kind of just foam that washes up on your shore. And as your brush runs out of paint, you're going to come in closer to your sand here. Your brush strokes are going to get lighter and lighter. You're going to get to a point where you can barely see them. They're just going to kind of disappear. And that is what we want, so that our water and our sand kind of just blend together. Okay. And this does not by any means need to be straight across. Like I said, it helps even a little bit if it's a little uneven. So have some areas that are very foamy coming right up onto your shore. You know, it might come an inch or two up into your sand here. And some areas are going to be right up on the water, not quite so far away from that water. Pull these edges out a little bit, kind of like we did with the clouds. And I'm tapping. Bringing that water in. Same thing that I said for the clouds applies to the water. You're pretty much not going to make an unrealistic shape here. Who knows exactly what that water looks like coming up on the shore, right? So you just want to give it some texture to make it look like it's got some movement. And then we're going to go into the very same thing in the water. And so as we're kind of doing these light lines here, I started to kind of come up into my water here. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to come up into my water. Make those lines nice and long. If you want to make them come out in the center a little bit, drop down so it looks a little bit like a wave. You can do that. But pull them out nice and thin. And we don't want too many of these, right? Just going to be little details. And one over here. And so as you get higher up into your water, I'm going to say your waves are going to get thinner. So maybe you transition from doing that tapping pattern to doing more just kind of straight lines like we did down here. And so I'll show you what I mean. Maybe I'll do one kind of bigger one here, or I'm going to pull this way out. I'm going to make this one a little bit thicker in here. But as I come up into this area, my lines are going to get thinner and thinner, where maybe I won't do as much of that tapping. I'll do a little bit more just straight across. Real thin lines, a little bit of paint. Not much at all. You're going to barely see these guys that are way out in the distance here. And that's how we're going to kind of force that perspective. Right, so they're going to get smaller and thinner as we go back in the distance. Wow, this one's very crooked. In this part, it's not to worry anyone, but it's a little more important in this part that these lines that you're making are straight. If they're a little bit crooked, it's going to kind of throw off what they look like. They won't look so much like waves. They'll look a little... They're going to look like things sitting in the water if they're a little too crooked. So I would say more than our horizon line, more than this line, more than anything else in this painting, try to make these guys in the distance here as straight as you can. And food for thought, if one of them just comes out absolutely horrible, this area of our painting is just that dark blue that we started with, so if it really comes out horrible, take some of that dark blue, paint right over it. No big deal. This is a painting that's pretty easy to make corrections. If you need to, right? Okay. I think I like that where it is. I'm gonna throw this one in the water. Let's see, which one are we gonna use next? Maybe I'll stick with this one actually. I'll wipe it, clean it off really well. Wipe it out. So I want something small and thin. We can always go with, for this next part, something like this. Anything in this region. If you want something wider like this, we're going to be going in with our posts here. We're going to make our little walkway area. So anything on the smaller side, round, flat, whatever you got. Maybe I'll use this guy. We'll see. Okay. And so if you have any of that dark brown that we used left, go ahead and use that. If you have a brown already like in a tube, go ahead and use that. We're going to be making kind of a chocolate brown. I used all of mine for my sand, so I need to go ahead and make just a little bit more. So bear with me for just 1 second. And really we need a tiny bit of this. So if you have like a little bit on your palette, use that. But if you really have none like I do, then just whip some up real fast. We know how to do it now. Your yellow, your blue, your red. Mix it all up. And this one we want a little bit darker because we definitely want those, the little wooden posts that we make to stand out from the background. You don't want them to look like they're just something stuck in the sand or like a dark area of the sand. So what we're gonna do once we mix up just a little bit of our dark brown there is we're gonna take just a drop of black, and I would say put it on the side. Don't put it directly in the color that you just mixed, because we want to add just a little bit at a time. So I have my, it's kind of like a chocolatey brown, I guess. Just a little bit. I truly have like a pea-sized amount in here. And then I'm going to take just a little bit of black to darken it up. So I have a nice dark brown there. And that's what we're going to use for our posts. Okay. And so if you look here, we kind of made like a path towards the beach. We have our dunes on the side here, but these little, like I said before, the kind of U smile shapes that we have at the bottom is kind of going to be, imagine that's where people have walked on. And so you're going to come up from where those little U's are, and that's going to be where you're going to stick your two main posts. If you look over here, I have like little ones that kind of go down off to the side, but right now we're going to focus on these big ones. So you want to pick your spot for two of these. I'll probably put mine maybe maybe like here and here. And here's the good thing about these guys. We're going to make the two in the front kind of thick. And they don't need to be perfect rectangles. They don't need to be perfectly straight. This is kind of one of those driftwood, you know, fallen over. I don't want them perfectly straight up and down in the sand. The tops don't have to be flat. It's one of those kind of old weather-beaten fences, right? So don't take too much time making these like perfect, perfect, perfect. No need. We're not making a picket fence. We are just making a little gateway to the beach. Alright, so I have my two posts right there. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a couple smaller ones. So a little bit shorter, a little bit thinner, kind of going off to each side. And so I'm going to make them kind of taper down a little bit. So I'm going to come on this side. If you need a smaller brush to do this, that's fine. And these are going to be the same way that those big ones are. They don't need to be straight up and down. I kind of made mine, you know, tipping to one side or the other. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. They kind of like sink down behind that sand over on this side. This side might be the same. Oh, that one's very crooked, but that's fine. Give them an inch or two in between. Okay, so we have some sticks, right? So what I'm gonna do is, I would say take the very smallest brush that you have. If you don't have one smaller than the one that you're using right now, like I have some of these little like, oh my gosh, they're like 3 hairbrushes. If you don't have any like that, that's totally okay. But what you're gonna do is take the brush that you're using, whatever smallest one that you have, rinse it off really good, and you'll get the same effect if you only put a little, like, just put like 2 bristles in the paint, right? So I have maybe this whole brush, but I'm just gonna, this is gonna be impossible for you to see. Can you see right there in the corner? I have the tiniest dot of paint. So you can use a bigger brush, just put way less paint. And so we're gonna connect all of these posts here. And if you look over here, you can barely see this in some of the parts, like some of the, let's see. So some of these, I mean, this line to this line is barely even here. And so you're just kind of implying that they're all connected. If it doesn't solidly go from one post to the next, if there's a little gap in it, if your brush, I mean, we have a tiny spot of paint on here, so if it doesn't make it all the way, fine. It'll make it just look super thin. So the thing that you don't really want to do is make them super thick, because then it's going to look like you have like wooden posts in between, and it's going to just look a little clunky. So you don't even, if you're nervous about this part, you don't need to do it. But we'll take just a touch of our paint here, and what you want to do is go from a little bit down on the top of one post. You're going to kind of curve it down to touch the next one. So I'm going to come on the top here, curve down in my next, come on here, curve down, and I'll zoom in and show you all in a sec. Come down. Right? So over here, they're barely there. If you have enough room, if you want to do 2, Maybe do one on the bottom, one on the top. And again, we're making kind of like a weather-worn fence here, so maybe not all of them have a connecting rope in between them. Maybe one of them got disconnected, so we don't need to put one on every post. I would say take your time with this, but don't worry about it. Don't get, nervous. And again, if you do one of these that you're just like, oh my gosh, that was awful, take some of your sand color and go right over it. No harm done, right? Because our kind of background sandy color has a lot of variety in it. So if you have to cover up one of these guys, you are not even going to notice. Okay, so last thing we're going to do to these fence posts is to make them look a little more like they have a wood grain to them. I'm going to take this same brush, it barely has any paint on it, no need to rinse it or anything, I'm going to take a little bit of my white, just a tiny bit. I would say dip in your white and then brush some of it off. And I'm going to take it and kind of go up and down this post, just with little stripes, so that my wood has some texture here. You can also, if you have like some of your sand color left, you can use that. You can do it on these little ones, but they get pretty small, so no need, but you can go for it. Okay, cool. We have one more portion left. I'm gonna rinse this brush. Again, we're gonna wanna do, if you have a really tiny brush, maybe not the smallest brush that you have, but something small like this. This one I was gonna say you want a flat one, but I guess it could work if you have a very small round one too, like this. Like no matter how I turn this, it's round. This one kind of has a flat side and a thin side, so you could use either of these. Maybe I'll switch just to show you all something different. Okay, and so last thing we're gonna do, we're gonna make some of these little tufts of grass here. I'll bring it in to show you. So we're not covering the whole thing with grass. We're gonna just do little kind of sections of it. And so we're gonna be using brown and green for our grass. And so the brown that I'm gonna use is the brown that I already have, the kind of darker brown that we use to make our fence posts. So this, I'm gonna use that for some of the grass, and then I'm gonna make a green. If you have a green, feel free to use it. This is more of like such a weird color to describe, but if you've ever been to the beach and they have that grass, but it's kind of like, that real dry, kind of like sand grass. It's a very light green color, not quite like a lime green, but kind of like grass that's like, it's like kind of, it's not dead, but like it's like drying out, It's kind of that light green color. So let's try to make that. And so if you have a green, again, you can always doctor it up if you have a green, but it's not the right color green. I would say if you have more of a neutral green, like if you think of a green crayon, if you have that type of green, add a little yellow to it, maybe a little white if it's too dark, and that might give you more of what we're looking for. If it's super neon-y green, and you're like, wow, that just looks unnatural, like a little too bright, add a little either your sand color, your tan, or a little bit of brown to it. That'll kind of temper it a little. Let's see. And you only need a little tiny bit of this. I'm doing a few blades of grass and that's about it. Something like that. My green, I'm going to use this brown, both of those to make my grass. And so what I'm going to do, since this brush is so small, I don't need to wash it, I can just kind of rinse it off on my paper towel here. And so we're going to take our small little brush here. I'm going to start with the brown grass because we don't need quite as much as that. And we don't want to overwhelm the green grass with it. The brown grass is going to kind of be what you would see in like the background. So I'll take my darker brown here and making these little blades, making these little blades of grass is has a lot to do with the pressure that you're applying to the canvas. And so instead of trying to taper off the shape of the grass, I would say you're going to go from a heavier pressure to a lighter pressure. So if your canvas is like this, instead of going just straight up and trying to somehow make the shape of the grass, you're going to imagine that you're going like this up your canvas, and then you're going to get lighter and lighter pressure as you come, and that'll kind of naturally make that blade of grass point. And so if you've ever taken a class with me before, I always say you don't want grass to stick straight up and down. It's going to look really fake. So if you look at any of my grass down here, they all have a little bit of a lean to them, one direction or the other. What you don't want is a bunch of grass sticking straight up like this, right? And so when you get them to kind of lean one way or the other, you get them to cross a little bit, you know, you get gaps, you get fuller areas, and that's what we want. I'm going to take a little bit of my brown. And good places to put these are where you have lights and darks in your sand next to each other. So like, I like to put some next to my fence post here. And we're just doing a few here and there, right? We don't want to like overwhelm with grass. Make some short ones, some tall ones. Don't forget that we're putting in some green grass, so don't overwhelm with this brown grass. The brown grass is kind of like a practice, right? So maybe on the bottom of my dune here, I'm going to make a little tuft of grass. Maybe on the edge here, I'll get one small one. I would say try not to put any in the middle of the path here, because that's where people walk. That's where people walk. I mean, that's where people would walk, I guess. You know, you can put them next to your fence here on either side. Put one over here. And you can put as much or as little of this as you want. If you're doing it and you just really don't like the way it's looking, you don't need to do a ton of it. If you are doing it and you get carried away with details like I do, and you want to do a ton, feel free to do a ton. Just feel like once you get a little a little detail like this down and you can do it really well, it just gets like really fun. And I feel like I end up doing too much, so. That's the basic shape that we're going for. Just you're gonna put down, pull up, put down, pull up, put down, pull up. And you're just gonna do the exact same thing with your green grass. And so if you look here, I did just a little bit with my brown because you want, I'll say, the majority of your grass to be green. So let me pull some of my green here. And I'm going to do this green grass in the same areas that I had my brown grass, but I'm going to just add to those little bunches, right? You can overlap some of them, it's not a big deal. And so I'm looking at my green that I mixed, and when I apply it, it doesn't look quite dark enough to me. It looks kind of neon-y when I put it on, so maybe I'll add a little more of that brown into the green to make it a little darker. You definitely can change your colors as you put them on. If you feel like they're not working for you or it's just not what you thought it was going to be when you apply it to the canvas, by all means change it. Colors always look different on the palette than they do on the canvas, and you just can't really tell until you do it, right? So not to worry if you put it on and you're like, oh, that's not good. Just change it up, no big deal. I won't tell, as long as you don't. So let's see, we're gonna come back with my darker green. Much better. Okay. So I'm kind of filling in some areas here where I have my brown grass over by my little fence post here. If you want them to like cross in front of your fence post, that's fine. And you can definitely do like standalone blades. That won't look unusual. You might think it will when you do it, but it totally makes sense. It's fine. All right, so you see I've got my little grass areas in there. If you want to really go out on these details here, since we did kind of some of these darker blue areas in here, if you want to take some of your darker blue and add to these little blades of grass, just to kind of tie in that color that we already used, you could definitely do that. If you don't feel like your grass is like sticking out enough, if you feel like it's kind of flat, go ahead and take some of that dark blue. Put some dark blue grass in there. And so it's not really about putting grass in that is blue. So of course the grass wouldn't be actually blue. It's kind of just what your eye sees when you look at the grass. You know, you might be seeing the blue in the sand reflecting, you might be seeing the blue of the sky reflecting, so it's not so much that the blade of grass would actually look blue, it's that it kind of appears blue because of what's around it. So putting a little blue, a little brown, a little tan, even a little black grass like in the background there is not unusual, and you definitely can do it if you feel like you want your grass to be a little hardier, if you want like real like nice bunches of that seagrass, then definitely do that because that would look great. Okay, and I think that's it. Alright, so hopefully you came out with a seascape that makes you, forget everything that's going on. I want you to hang this somewhere special and just look at it when you need a little break. Because that's what I'm gonna do, right? Sign your name to it if you feel so inclined, and definitely send in your pictures when you do it. I love to see them. If you have any questions, as always, leave them in the comments. I try to tune in when the class is going on, so if you have any questions about anything that I'm doing, colors, brushes, anything like that, let me know, and I'm happy to give back to you guys. And so thanks for painting with me again.